Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora. I think we have Aria and Darren with us here for the Asian Legal Network. Kia ora. We've got 10 minutes with you, so I'll hand straight over to you to talk about the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill.
Kia ora koutou, mihi atu ki a koe te tiomana, I a mema o te parimata, kia ora tēnei te mihi. E tika hoki ki te mihi ki te mana o te tiriti Waitangi me whakaputanga, me ngā tūpuna o e rā mea. Ai, ko Aria tēnei, ko Darren ahau, no mau e te tino o maria ki te whakakanohi I te Asian Legal Network I te rangi nei. Kia ora koutou. It's a very big privilege to be here submitting against the Treaty Principles Bill. We're here on behalf of the Asian Legal Network. We are an organisation of lawyers, academics, as well as community organisers who want a better Aotearoa, with a particular focus on Asian communities, particularly the margins of Asian communities who are often left out of policy and law. More recently, a lot of our work has required a big tiriti focus. It's really connected with what we do, and it's because of that and the expertise we've got which we are submitting today, and we'll show those connections in our submission.
As Dan said, we are speaking today in strong opposition of the Treaty Principles Bill. I'd like to begin with an overview of our submissions today. In the interest of time, we will defer to our
Chinese to put this whole presentation up into the body here. Beautiful. All right.
In the interest of time, we will defer to our written submissions on the full reasons of our opposition. We tautoko the submissions before us that oppose the bill on similar grounds of reasoning, in particular, but not limited to, the submissions of Te Hungaroa Māori o Aotearoa and Asian supporting tino rangatiratanga, as well as the group of 50 King's Councils that spoke before us. Today, we will focus on our fifth ground of opposition, that the bill may lead to detrimental, unintended consequences for other equity measures and specific protections for marginalised peoples. There is no doubt that the bill will be disproportionately and detrimentally harmful towards tangata whenua. As tauiwi, we are sharing our perspectives in support of he whakaputanga and te tiriti, in support of tangata whenua, in support of tino rangatiratanga. Today, we wish to share the impact the bill will have on our community to show that tangata whenua are not alone in the collective fight against colonialism.
So often we get asked, why is the Asian Legal Network interested in te tiriti Waitangi? In short, we think it's the right thing to do. If we're pursuing a good foundation, we think for Aotearoa, for belonging for Asian peoples, it's important to get it right. We think te tiriti sets a good framework for this. But also, a lot of the reason why te tiriti gets disregarded is because of colonisation. And the problem for us is many of our peoples have faced colonisation both here and abroad. So there is an affinity against measures that are colonial. But more specifically, there is the adage that what's good for Te Ao Māori and te tiriti is good for Aotearoa. We think this bill is a really good example of what is bad for te tiriti and Te Ao Māori is bad for Aotearoa. So our focus is going to be specifically how this addresses Asian communities in particular. But we tautoko everything that's already been said about how it overrides te tiriti o Waitangi. I'll just pause, Rawari, if you had a... Oh, te haeretona, kia ora. So we'll stop for questions at the end, but there are three key points that we'll highlight as to why Asian communities will be feeling a bit anxious about this bill passing through. The first is there is a huge consolidation of power in Parliament to override the courts. We've heard about the ability to define rights, retrospectively change rights. Now, the terrifying part of this is these rights are much bigger than just rights. These are constitutional foundations. The Waitangi Tribunal found, and we mihi to fire Kathleen just before talking about Wiparata, the Waitangi Tribunal said that this bill has the ability to turn back the clock to Wiparata 1877. If you're an Asian person, 5 years after passing of Wiparata, there were a lot of very problematic laws passed by this House that addressed, that excluded Asian peoples from migrating to Aotearoa. Now, if Parliament has the ability to change rights when it wants to, by the majority, and these are constitutional rights and self-determination, it leaves open a terrible, worrying precedent that this could happen with any other minority group. So that is one of the problems of it's not just separation of powers and a legalistic idea. This will have potential consequences for other minority groups and minority rights. The second part is that equality has been misused, in this particular principle, the redefined principle 3, to undercut equity measures. And by equity measures, we mean that certain communities will require equity measures such as the Māori Health Authority. Sometimes this is because it is addressing problems set up by colonisation, the effects of colonisation. It is also a practical reality for Asian communities, for instance, where we will need translation services. We will need specific linguistic, cultural services. A lot of our people don't do well with mental health. A lot of our people require extra support. Now, if you use equality as a blanket application and say it is part of our constitutional foundations, this worries a lot of Asian programs, and that is something we're concerned about. Now, how does this work in practice? What is it specific with this bill? The courts have applied treaty principles, because of how foundational it is, into legislation even when tiriti is not mentioned. So does this mean that this bill will now say equality applies across many different programs, funding, and impact other legislation? At best, it creates a very convoluted, unclear sense of what the law is. This can create a chilling effect on decision makers to fund, say, Asian family service providers, for instance. At worst, it means it's going to completely cut these programs because they don't fit equality. That's the worst part of what could happen. Now, it is possible that someone who sponsors this bill might say, oh, actually, we didn't mean for this to apply to everyone, which begs the question, who does this apply to? Which would mean that this bill just only applies to Māori and Māori rights and Māori equity measures, which ironically means that Māori are targeted in applying equality measures, which in itself is self-defeating. So it either applies across all equity measures, which is bad, or it just applies to Māori equity measures, which is very bad. So that is something to contend with why we think equality is misapplied here, very dangerous, and also what does it mean for the intersections of Asian communities, our disabled whānau, our queer whānau, these compound. The last part is process. People like Sir Geoffrey Palmer has talked about process being so important. Asian peoples at the best of times aren't well represented in government and decision making. Now, when you truncate the process even further, it means that our views are rarely ever properly talked about. A lot of these issues I've mentioned have probably, that we've mentioned have probably not been surfaced because the timing is far too short. And that's let alone the treaty partners, the partners to tiriti, who haven't been properly part of this discussion. So I'll stop there in that this process is damaging, it is concerning at a societal and a constitutional level. And we really support that. We really urge that this committee does not support this bill. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora, thank you for that. We've got probably time for a question, and I see Rauri has had one earlier, so we'll go to him first.
Oh, tēnā koe, Darren. Ia oti rā, ki tā kōrero I tēnei rā. I just wanted to say, apologise for my mute not being on, but I was really, really blown away by your introduction to the presentation, and thank you for the kōrero in your presentation and the insightful knowledge that you shared with us. Just very quickly, the tiriti o Waitangi, before the Treaty Principles Bill was presented into this particular process, Aotearoa has been a very inclusive country before that, and this has created some huge angst and division within the country. Have you seen a big change just in your own observation since the introduction of the Treaty Principles Bill in the way you see your legal practice or just even in your own community or and even in your own whānau?
I'm based in Tamaki Makaurau. The amount of violence that Asian peoples have faced has increased, types of racism. That's because Asian peoples have always largely been a punching bag when things have gone wrong. Economy turns down, blame the migrants who come in. This is a global trend. The lack of social cohesion is terribly concerning for us, and the process of this bill, with the lack of public consultation and education as well, has meant that this will be an increased risk. Yes.
Kia ora. Look, thank you for that. And I echo Rawari's acknowledgement of your reo. Steve, unfortunately, we don't have time for a question from you, so we'll move on to our next submitter, who is Peter Claywood. Thank you again for your...
Ke pai rā o Valentine's me te matinga a kāpene kuki. Kia ora koutou.